on the call and on Zoom with us, and also our delegates that will be speaking later on in the agenda. Welcome to everyone, and those who are streaming from the comforts of your home. Welcome to our public meeting. And so all members of council are present. And to the members, any disclosure of pecuniary interest on the agenda as presented to you this evening? Okay, we'll have that duly reflected in the minutes. The introduction and certainly the purpose of our meeting today is our delegates. It seemed to be a little bit of backfeed there, Sean. All right, the purpose of the meeting is to hear public comment on a proposed housekeeping zoning bylaw amendment to the Sandwich South zoning bylaw 85-18 pursuant to the provisions of the Planning Act, RSO 1990. Currently, there are 3 separate settlement areas in the town's official plan pertaining to lands within the former Sandwich South area that collectively identify areas where long-term urban uses are to be established. Within each of these 3 settlement areas, future development lands are either within a hamlet development designation, requiring further study or official plan amendments to determine the identity to the ultimate preferred urban land uses, or a specific urban land use designation, such as the Maidstone Hamlet residential designation. The purpose of the housekeeping amendment would have the effect of changing the zoning on these lands to a site-specific agricultural zone A that would permit all of the uses in the agricultural zone A, with the exception of livestock intensive agriculture uses and greenhouses. In addition, it will continue to prohibit mushroom farms. So with that, I'd like to ask Mr. Hillman if there's anything else that you want to add this evening to the agenda.
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I will just briefly review the planning report that was on the agenda this evening that members of the public would have been able to review. So we'll just go through that quite quickly and offer substantial time for comments and questions and so on. So Sean, if you could go to attachment 1, please, of the planning report. And further to the introduction by the mayor, I'll just quickly review. This is a map of the land use designations that exist in the town of Tecumseh. And you can see that any of the areas that are in color are generally deemed to be settlement areas. In particular, we have the area at the north that comprises the former town of Tecumseh, village of St. Clair Beach, and what's referred to as Tecumseh Hamlet down to just south of County Road 42. And that is one of the major settlement areas in the municipality. The second settlement area is to the southwest, Old Castle Hamlet, and you can see it outlined just off of the 401, and it has an outline with a dashed black line. And then the third major settlement area is Maidstone Hamlet, and it is just north of Highway 3 along Manning Road in the southeast. Each of these settlement areas is identified in the official plan as the area within which we will direct urban growth. They are areas that will, over time, require full municipal services, so sanitary, sewers, and water. And the thrust of the official plan is that as the town grows and we accommodate additional residents and businesses, we will direct those uses to those areas. So there are land use policies that apply to those lands and guide the development. One of the major growth areas are gray areas on this map, and they are called hamlet development, which is synonymous with future development. These are lands identified for a form of urban use that are subject to further study to determine what is the preferred form of that use. So, for example, in Tecumseh Hamlet along the Banwell corridor, there are significant lands that are in a gray color. Those are subject to a Tecumseh Hamlet secondary plan, which is ongoing. And in the interim, agricultural uses are permitted. In addition, in Tecumseh Hamlet, you'll see an area on the east side of the hamlet, and that's what we refer to as the Manning Road secondary plan area, and it's yellow. And you'll see that there are no road patterns there. That is land that has been identified for residential use. No plans of subdivision are approved yet, and they continue to be zoned agricultural. So they are for future use as well, but they do have a land use designation on them. Then when we go down to the Old Castle Hamlet and the Maidstone Hamlet area, you'll see that there are lands in Old Castle, firstly, that are gray colored. Those gray lands are identified as hamlet development, meaning they are reserved for a future urban use once a detailed study is undertaken to determine what should the use be on those lands. And finally, in Maidstone Hamlet, you'll see a number of areas that are sort of a, whoops, there we go. We'll get down there. Large swaths of land that are just a sort of beige, yellowy color, tan color. And those are, again, areas you'll see there's no road pattern. And those followed a planning study that identified them for future residential use. And they are zoned agricultural in the interim. And again, these lands are all identified for future urban use. So with the lands being zoned agricultural at this time, there are intensive agricultural uses that are permitted, including intensive livestock operations, mushroom operations, and greenhouse operations. So the purpose of the zoning bylaw amendment, the housekeeping amendment, is to take the agricultural zoning that applies to the lands that are not yet developed and zoned agricultural. And Sean, if we just go to attachment 2, we'll be able to see in relation to those settlement areas, lands that are identified for some form of long-term urban use that are zoned agricultural. So the proposal is that all the lands that are identified in a red color would be placed into an agricultural zone that limits the types of agricultural uses. It would not allow intensive types of agricultural uses on them. Tecumseh historically has predominantly been characterized by cash crops, soybeans, and corn, fundamentally. There are some other types of uses, but in comparison to some of the other areas in Essex County, certainly our predominant form of agricultural production is for cash crops. But in the interim, there has been a permit issued for a property in Old Castle Hamlet for a greenhouse operation. So it was deemed prudent at this time to consider a rezoning to place all of the red lands into this zone that would restrict more intensive types of agricultural uses, thereby ensuring their long-term availability for urban conversion at some point in the future. Very briefly, Mr. Mayor, we have reviewed in our planning report provincial policy and the county official plan, and feel that such a rezoning would be consistent and in conformity with those documents. With respect to the Sandwich South official plan, we feel that there is policy direction that establishes this type of rezoning is in fact appropriate. And through the Planning Act, of course, before council can make any consideration for rezoning, it is required that a public meeting be held and an opportunity for people to provide input is made available. So under our current COVID conditions, Zoom is our form of public meeting with council. So that is the purpose for this evening. And then finally, we just wanted to make a comment with respect to a number of the submissions that have been received and are on the agenda relate to the issuance of a building permit for the greenhouse for cannabis at 2085 Highway number 3 in Old Castle, which I was just speaking to on the south side of Highway 3. And it is the opinion of the town that the proposed use for which the permit was issued is a permitted use under the current agricultural zone. And as council is aware, a public meeting is not required for the issuance of a building permit for legal use. The chief building official does have regard to applicable law, which includes the zoning that is in effect on land. So for this evening's meeting, it's intended to hear input on the zoning application or the zoning amendment that is in front of council for the purposes that have been discussed. And Mr. Mayor, I can take any questions now or or at any time, and certainly we look forward to hearing any input that's provided this evening.
I would ask that for council's indulgence that we reserve our, certainly our questions. We'll give the opportunity for delegates to certainly weigh in. But also, Mr. Hillman, just to clarify as well, is that tonight's meeting is for input and no decisions are set tonight.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I should have said that, and that is absolutely correct. This is an opportunity for input. No decision by council will be made this evening. Okay,
and so with that, I am going to certainly open it up to the delegations. For clarity as well, is that in lieu of our time, is we're going to hold you to your time that you're allocated, and roughly it's 5:15 at this stage here, and with the delegates that are here and not looking at others to come back, I'll be asking obviously those who are online if they want to certainly weigh in. We're going to hold you to the 10-minute, 10-minute timeline. The clerk should be on, hopefully, where we can see the clerk, and will notify when your time is getting close to the final 30 seconds so that delegates can wrap up. And because in that instance, we want to make sure that everyone has an opportunity to weigh in and bring their views and certainly their recommendations and opinions to council. So with that, I will now ask on Ms. Judy Robson, who's the first delegate in response. And I'm going to say the next person on deck to be ready, Peter Angerman, also a resident in the community. So Ms. Robson, you're on.
Good evening. My name is Judy Robson, a resident of Oldcastle and one of the owners of land in Oldcastle that is zoned for agriculture and designated in the official plan for hamlet development. The purpose of the hamlet development designation in the OP is for the continuation of existing farming practices until such time that there is development plans for an urban use. It is legislated that zoning bylaws must conform to the official plan within 3 years, making the housekeeping amendment 20 years overdue. According to the Essex County official plan, only lands outside settlement boundaries are designated agriculture, and that agricultural lands reserved for urban development are not considered to be prime agricultural areas by the province, but are recognized within the planning framework as having agricultural value until such time as they are developed, hence the need for an amendment to the Sandwich South Agricultural Zoning Bylaw. I support and agree with a restrictive amendment to the agricultural zone that ensures the conflict between urban and agricultural land uses is minimized as development proceeds on our hamlet of Oldcastle. I agree with the intent of the housekeeping amendment to regulate intensive agricultural operations and new farming ventures of significant financial investment that may have a long-term impact and would potentially delay the land's conversion to urban uses. I do not agree that restricting greenhouses as they are defined in the Sandwich South bylaws from the Hamlet Agricultural Zone as being the needed regulatory measures to minimize long-term impact, but rather it is one that interferes with existing agricultural uses that provide economic benefit to the farmers and surrounding community. Example, it could prohibit the use of plastic ground covering on land over seedlings or the use of a simple constructed conventional garden greenhouse. Therefore, I feel that this housekeeping zoning bylaw amendment does not adequately conform to the SSOP that all new developments require a ZBA and an OPA must be serviced by a piped sanitary sewer system, but instead interferes with existing farming practices rather than support the objective of lands reserved for hamlet development. March 2017 and October 2019. Resolutions by council unanimously in favor of preparing and financing a special plan for the purpose of specially designating hamlet development lands in the Sandwich South official plan, primarily for residential designation. Then, in December 2019, a permit is granted on Hamlet Development lands for an intensive employment agricultural cannabis operation. The action of granting a permit for this new intensive agricultural development on lands for urban use that through resolution has been made subject to a future specific designation planning process focused primarily on residential use demonstrates how little administration and council values the future sustainability of the Old Castle community and the need to provide sufficient land for future housing to those living in the southern part of the municipality. Report PBS 2020-24 in the section entitled Background directs attention to recently issuing a building permit on Hamlet Development lands on Highway 3 in Oldcastle.
Ms.
At a regular
Robson, I'm gonna please conform to what's being proposed here today. Let's not go back to the past. I think Mr. Hillman explained himself quite well. So let's deal with the 8518 pursuant to the provisions of the Act. That is the proposed housekeeping zoning bylaw amendment. Let's keep it to that, please.
Oh, so you're saying I cannot comment on the report itself since it is contained in the report?
That's correct. I mean, obviously that is a permit that was that was passed and the requirements at that time were of legal, as Mr. Hellman indicated. What we're looking at is moving forward on the amendment.
Okay, so for clear and for the record, you are restricting us for commenting on the report itself, even though Mr. Hillman has contained it in the report.
No, that's not accurate.
Okay, thank you. I hear.
Carry on.
Well, I'm finished then. You have stopped us from. Actually, it's disappointing to think that this town administration and council has continued working behind closed doors and are not allowing us to have a meaningful say in the growth and development of our community.
Well, all I'm going to say is that's not an accurate accounting. There's no closed down or closed door meetings that are being done. These are all certainly above board, and under the existing official plan, you know, it's really not an accurate accounting, Ms. Robson. So then we'll move on to Mr. Angerman, resident, and then on deck, Mary and Joe Ondich, residents.
Your Worship, members of council, delegates, administrative peoples. I live in the Irish Triangle, also known as the hamlet of Maidstone. I don't have anything but a few questions here. Perhaps Mr. Hillman could answer some of those for me. I just needed clarification on site specific. I believe that probably pertains to things like agricultural uses or specific uses that might be industrial, what have you. I am worried about the word greenhouses, and I'm especially worried about cannabis operations, just for the amount of light output that they pump out. Perhaps this is a non-issue, a non-starter. Hopefully we can clarify that this evening. So for Mr. Hillman, he mentioned the phrase intensive agricultural uses. I'm assuming that means greenhouses, mushroom farms, things of that nature, as was specified earlier. Is that correct?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. Yes, what's being referred to are actually three core agricultural type use of intensive livestock operations, greenhouse operations, and mushroom farms.
Okay. The other point I want to make is I have a good recollection of seeing the master plan for this area maybe a year or so ago, which seems to be reasonable and actually well laid out, and it does encompass urbanization, if you will. A nice plan from what I recall. The fact that we're also zoned as agricultural of any sort, does that ever take precedence over the long-term plan? Can it affect the long-term plan?
Mr. Hillman?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Well, if I've understood your question correctly, so there's two planning documents that guide both decisions of council and landowners primarily. One is the official plan, which sets out the long-term intention and intended land uses. And then zoning, which affects the ability to determine specific types of uses and is the document against which one would consider for zoning bylaw or for a building permit, sorry. So, you know, they both are in play a little bit when we're dealing with what are long-term uses. The zoning sets out the uses that are legally allowed.
Yes.
The official plan sets out at a policy level longer term type policies and land uses. In the agricultural areas of Oldcastle, the bulk of those lands are designated hamlet development, which is, as I said, similar to a future development designation.
Okay, so it's possible, there's a potential for some sort of greenhouse operation to override the existing long-term plan.
I wouldn't use the word, Mr. Mayor, through you, override. There is currently zoning that's in effect that is quite common in these areas identified for long-term urban use. So there are currently agricultural uses that are permitted. It may over time delay urban uses, but it does not necessarily, there's not an override concept really that exists.
If some organization were to come into play that wanted to, say, for example, build a grow up, is that possible, considering the long-term urban plan?
Under the current zoning, if it were in a greenhouse, that would be permitted. And so the purpose of the change to the zoning bylaw that is being considered this evening is to prohibit that type of operation from happening inside the hamlet areas on agricultural land.
To prohibit?
Prohibit.
Yes, prohibit.
Okay, so what I'm understanding is everybody here is working to negate that if it comes into play. There are no prospects out there for any such operations. Is that correct?
A permit has been issued for one, which is being constructed under the current zoning on Highway 3. The purpose of this rezoning is...
Well, that's Oldcastle though, right? I'm in Maidstone.
Right. No, I'm speaking to all the areas. So in Maidstone specifically, that is correct. So if it's agricultural land inside Maidstone Hamlet, the proposal is that agricultural lands inside that hamlet would not be allowed to have greenhouse mushroom farms or intensive livestock operations.
All right.
That's the
Okay.
proposal.
Okay, so we'll have to wrap it up.
Considered.
The 10 minutes are up. But,
All right. Just,
but
if I can make one quick comment, from
Sure.
my backyard here, in the evenings, I can actually very clearly see Leamington greenhouses, the ones that are lit up, which are the grow-ups. And I'd hate to see that because even the one in Oldcastle, it's going to have an impact on the city of Windsor, I would imagine. It is a lot of light, which can be negated, I think, with the use of curtains or what have you, but that's another issue for another kind of an organization. And I yield. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Angerman. Now I'll call upon Mary and Joe Ondich, residents, and then I would ask that Perry Burford be on deck.
Your worship, the Ondicks aren't logged in yet, so it would be Mr. Burford would be next, I believe.
Okay, Mr. Burford, if you're ready, and then I would ask Susan Rao to be on deck.
Okay, good evening. This is Perry Burford speaking.
Good evening.
In addition to the letter that I sent to Laura Moy on this subject dated September 3, I want to add the following comments. The prevailing wind is from 210 magnetic. The residents of the hamlet of Oldcastle are exactly downwind from that cannabis facility. And therefore, we will bear the brunt of the skunk smell from this, from whenever they start production until whatever's going to happen in the future to that industry. I have no idea. So I just want to thank council and administration for that. We really appreciate the fact that you could care less about the town about the hamlet of Oldcastle residents. It's really a shame because, the hamlet of Oldcastle was the center of the township of Sandwich South. And it was the township of Sandwich South that started the Oldcastle Industrial Park, as you know. And so when in amalgamation in '98, this was a gift to the town of Tecumseh. And rather than treat the residents of the hamlet of Oldcastle fairly, you have done exactly the opposite. In my opinion, you have not acted fairly. You have not even acted equitably or responsibly. You have a duty to the citizens of the hamlet of Oldcastle, the same responsibility you have to the north end of the hamlet of Maidstone. And that all you guys have in your mind.
Mr. Burford, I'm gonna ask you to stick to, as I alluded to the first delegate, is to refer to the amendment for the Sandwich South zoning bylaw 8518 moving forward. We need your comments there and not on issues that are behind us.
Yeah, well, the comment is specifically on that bylaw is the fact that it prohibits the growing of cannabis, or the proposed bylaw doesn't even mention the word cannabis. That's a major issue in my mind. And it prohibits the growth of cannabis in greenhouses everywhere except
Mr. Burford,
the hamlet of Oldcastle. I take exception to that.
I'm going to ask you one more time. Please keep your remarks to the moving forward on the amendment that's being proposed this evening.
Well, I propose that the amendment be modified to include the banning of mushroom and any other greenhouse operations, including the facility currently under progress on Walker Road, or on the number 3 highway west of Walker Road. That is my specific comment. Thank you very much.
Mr. Burford.
Thank you very much. You guys do a great job.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, I'll ask Susan Rao. Please, you're on. And then Celeste O'Neill on deck.
Okay. First off, I think it would have been prudent to have this public meeting last October. I just want to make a few comments about the CTV report of the October 22nd meeting, where the mayor made some statements. And from those statements, we were told that the property at 2085 Highway 3 would need rezoning and a license. He also stated that it would be a long way before any shovel would go into the ground. And thirdly, to quote, "We would never make a decision without input from the citizens." These 3 statements are blatant lies. Needed a rezoning for the building, didn't happen. It would be a long way before a shovel would go in the ground. The shovel had already gone in the ground. The trenches were dug. Santa Rosa cement was poured for the footings. And thirdly, a public
Mrs. Rao,
meeting
again,
never occurred.
Mrs. Rao, can we keep it specifically to the amendments that are being proposed here this evening? Number one, I will basically let you know in terms of, and I think I've answered that question in terms of the CTV or CBC announcement that was there before. And if the lands required zoning, there's a big difference here. If they required zoning, then there's no doubt there has to be a public forum to deal with that. But those lands were already zoned agriculture. And as we all know through the Minister of Agriculture, Mr. Hardeman said it very clear to 1,900 delegates in Ottawa, very clear, that cannabis is a legal crop. And so it's very difficult when land is already zoned, it's zone agriculture, and the agriculture crop is cannabis, which is a legal entity. So this is why we're here today, to look at amendments moving forward. But don't take words out of context, and in particular from verbatim. You need to ask the author to know exactly what was said at that particular time. So I don't want to mislead people that are on the line listening to this, because the reality is those lands are, there's multiple zoning. There's commercial in the front of it, and then agriculture at the back. So if it did require, in essence, a zoning change, then a permit would not have been issued, and that would have been that. But having said that, those lands were identified as agriculture, and so the permit was issued in compliance by the building official at that particular time. But I don't want to spend 20 minutes and lose the fact of what we're trying to do is try to move forward in terms of making those amendments, so that the hamlet designations in that we're moving forward in dealing with that. And so that's what I'm trying to do is to try to get people to talk about the amendments moving forward that are required.
Well, it's very hard to move forward with anything when we are stuck with this operation going on hamlet development lands. We have very little land for hamlet development. And now we're going to have a cannabis operation with the odor that goes with it. And I believe you equated wheat and corn to cannabis. There's no comparison. Wheat and corn don't need a license, and they don't smell like skunk. It's pretty hard to move beyond that, because that's what we're stuck with. It's very disappointing the way Oldcastle and the area has been treated by this council. I might add, I emailed you and the members of council in August to express our opposition. I heard back from Andrew Dowie alone. Nobody else responded. It speaks volumes about our communications are ignored. I'll close with that.
Thank you very much. Now I'll ask Celeste O'Neill, who's next. And on deck is Josette Eugenie.
Your worship, it appears Ms. O'Neill may have left the meeting, and Ms. Eugenie sent her regrets.
Okay. Then I'm going to open it up to anyone who's on the line. If there are members that want to, again, there's post questions to administration, or have any comments registered to be included in the minutes of the meeting tonight. I don't hear anyone from the audience. Councillor Dowie.
Thank you, Worship. Actually, I have a question for Ms. Robson if she's still here. And it has to do with some of the comments about the go forward. So the early part of the presentation that did not have to do with the property on Highway 3, I think you did touch upon some worthwhile directions for our go forward approach. wondering if you could itemize them for us again, what you would like to see, in a perfect world, what kinds of restrictions or applications are worthwhile. And you mentioned the greenhouse specifically. What's being proposed is a very wide-reaching, I guess, prohibition or site-specific zoning requirement that would always have a public process if someone wants to build a greenhouse. But you spoke of certain practices that have plastic or the use of technologies that are similar to greenhouses, but maybe just part of a typical crop and a typical agricultural practice. So I'm wondering if you could go a bit further into that for certainly for my understanding of what those kinds of practices are and what sort of, I don't want to call it a loophole, but if an automatic granting of those kinds of practices is worthwhile, just if you could share with us what that would be envisioned to be.
Okay, Andrew, I understand what you're saying. First of all, you have to understand our goal. And our goal is to increase the amount of residential development in the Old Castle Hamlet to create a more balanced, healthy, sustainable community. So with that in mind, you'll understand that we are also owners of probably the largest remaining property of Hamlet development lands in Old Castle. And therefore they are under agricultural use. So simply by restricting and saying no greenhouses, that's such a general and very bare bone type of bylaw. My understanding of Hamlet development lands, and as long as, well, we've owned them forever, was that no new development could occur on these lands without on sewers, on a piped-in sewer system. None of them, nowhere. And that these lands were for only urban use. So I respect the fact that in the long term, and maybe even shorter than I am thinking of, that they will be turned into urban use. However, meanwhile, our farm is being farmed. So when you look at the definition of greenhouse in the Sandwich South bylaws, again, it's just a bare bone definition. It doesn't go into detail of any kind, but it does restrict any type of I'm sorry, not restrict, but describes a greenhouse as any plastic covered structure or on land as well. So I'm trying to interpret that. So that means if you restrict greenhouses totally, farmers today in early spring often will plant the seedlings, maybe it's the sweet corn, maybe it's tomatoes, and then they put a plastic cover over that, some of them, in order to protect them and create a greenhouse effect for the early spring, and pipe in like water lines going through it as well. So that's one practice. And one of our fields is a field that's used for producing sweet corn and other vegetable products. Okay, the second thing is, if you just say greenhouse without any description, that means that on my farm, I also grow vegetables for my personal use. Or maybe I even want my grandchildren to go in and grow some. Maybe I want to make a small greenhouse. You have, simply by saying the word greenhouse restricted, then technically I am breaking the law by putting up a typical, normal, what I understand a garden greenhouse to be. And so simply by putting in this amendment, no greenhouses, that does possibly will restrict some farming practices that have been carried on in the past, and any future smaller garden greenhouses that we may want to put on our farm. Therefore, I feel there should be a better description of that as well. However, besides just the greenhouse, I feel that they should have, that's not conforming to the zoning bylaw or the official plan. The official plan says any new development, anything that goes on Hamlet development lands must have a ZBA and an OPA and be on piped in sewers. And as far, for example, the Del Duca property, they have applied to have their lands, I think it was for 23 years to be developed, just being developed now because they're on piped in sewers. I don't see anything in the agriculture, in this amendment, that will protect that concept. Like if I come up with some other type of agricultural intensive operation that will mean a lot of money investment, then and it's not there, you haven't followed the official plan. The official plan has totally been ignored, even though it says to have a zoning bylaw amendment for any new development. This isn't saying this in this amendment. This isn't holding up that vision. I would like to see that vision held up so that nothing, any type of new development doesn't go on our lands or any land that would restrict future residential development at all. And therefore, this amendment should conform, the zoning bylaw amendment should hold up that official plan. Does that answer your question? Not really.
I mean, you've identified, through you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, Mr. Robson, yes, you've answered a part of what I was looking for. So I guess if I know the administration would like to respond at a certain point, but I was hoping to, maybe you could describe maybe just what those practices are, where the interpretation of a greenhouse may be cumbersome, where you can consider something a greenhouse, but it really isn't an industrial greenhouse, but is more so a covering or a way to protect your crop that's in the ground.
Yeah, I would like to see, I'm not sure if I can totally answer that because I'm not necessarily a greenhouse professional builder, but I would like to see more dimensions in the zoning bylaws. Something that says, okay, a greenhouse for this purpose, for the use of flowers, floral, vegetables, or whatever, in this size of structure. We have, for example, some greenhouses in Oldcastle, Flora Gardens, in a commercial area on the, it would be the southeast corner of Walker Road. Those, in my vision, are greenhouses that would not restrict future development and growth, residential future and growth. So if in the bylaw they had, okay, a greenhouse this size, and put the dimensions that Mr. Hillman would see would be appropriate and would not be restricting future development, would not require a great deal of investment, so that myself as an owner would say, oh, well, no, you can't go ahead, this costs us too much to put up. It would just simply more for personal use, or even for commercial use possibly. So I'd like to see dimensions. And then I would also like to see a amendment that upholds the official plan. Simply saying no greenhouses is not upholding the official plan. And so I think that should be a little clearer.
Mr. Hillman?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Ms. Robson, for those comments. I just want to try and maybe clear up, I think, two real fundamental things. And one is to do with existing zoning that applies to land and official plan policy. And the other is what the OP actually says, what the plan says about hamlet development, because I think maybe we could help clear a few things up. So on the first, existing zoning versus an official plan. Zoning is the operative tool that determines what can go on a piece of property and what permits can be issued by the municipality. In the world of the chief building official, who is really a special entity under the Municipal Act, they exist separate from the influence of council and administration. And the chief building official is charged with having regard to applicable law. One of the items that deals with applicable law is zoning. Applicable law is not what the official plan says. It is what the zoning of land is. So when one comes in and asks to build a home, the chief building official is looking through a zoning bylaw and confirming that in fact a home is permitted and what the regulations are pertaining to that home, in addition to other matters that might relate to other applicable law, whether it's rules of a site plan agreement or rules from the Ministry of Transportation and or the matters that are listed in the in actually the Building Code Act as well. So that's one thing. So saying that a greenhouse, if it is deemed to be a permitted use under zoning, is not permitted because an official plan might say something, just from our perspective, is not a clear and fair statement, and it's not accurate. The second thing is, what does the official plan actually say? So for hamlet development, it certainly clarifies that these are lands intended for long-term urban use. And as we've had this discussion many times in the past, it does mention residential, but it also mentions other forms of urban use, number one. And I think we've come to some consensus to, as a municipality, say, we are committed to take further studies underway to consider what are the preferred types of uses in Oldcastle Hamlet on the hamlet development lands. Understanding that there has been a preference stated by a number of persons living in the hamlet, and we understand that and we appreciate it. But until the study's complete, that will determine long-term uses. But more specifically, the official plan says that new development will require an official plan amendment and a rezoning. That part is correct. And it says that new development will be serviced by full municipal services. Okay, so there is a trigger there before development can happen. But what it also says is that agricultural uses, as set out in the agricultural section of the official plan, are permitted. Those are permitted as an interim use. That's a normal use that happens prior to urbanization. And they're really not deemed to be development in the common use of that word. So I think I would take exception to the questioning of the municipality that development has taken place by virtue of a greenhouse operation. I would say that that's a legally permitted use under the agricultural zoning, and that agricultural uses are permitted. What the official plan actually then says is that the exception to the agricultural uses are mushroom operations and intensive livestock agricultural uses. What we have said is that the intent of that section seems to be for intensive uses, so that greenhouses also would be appropriate to put into a rezoning that is being considered this evening. So, you know, I hope, Mr. Mayor, that helps with some, you know, analysis of what the official plan actually says relative to development versus long-term development or agricultural uses that are deemed to be permitted in the designation. And if I could just add one final comment, we certainly will look into, I think Ms. Robson was making reference to, there's certain agricultural operations that have plastic coverings that are actually on the ground. And it creates a scenario where the growth of the plant happens much more quickly in the spring. There are certain types of crops where that is used. So we'll look into clarifying that that is not the intent of restricting or prohibiting greenhouses. And we will look at this concept of, are there small scale greenhouse operations that we could bring back to council for consideration, knowing that development takes time to take place, and that as Ms. Robson has noted, there may be some interim situations, and there are some properties that are of fair size in that area that are used residentially, and that may want to have small scale greenhouse structures. The question will become what is deemed to be a suitable size, but that's certainly something we could look into and bring back to council for consideration as part of this.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Hillman. And one thing I want to also request that if you've got notes, members, the delegations in that, please submit your remarks to the clerk's office. so that we can certainly add that to include into the minutes of this particular meeting.
Can I make a comment?
Mr. Hageman, well,
Brief.
I'm stretching
just-
the rules here, but
Okay.
but yeah, go ahead.
Again, for Mr. Hillman, you just mentioned that you used the phrase interim use. And I think I understood you to say that anything agricultural, including a greenhouse structure, falls under that category. My comment to that would be, how would a permanent structure costing approximately $1.5 million an acre to build be considered an interim use?
Again, through you, Mr. Mayor, just to clarify, what I'm speaking to are two different things. One is zoning, which currently exists, and that's the determinant for the issuance of a building permit. What we're discussing this evening is putting into effect a zoning classification that would not allow a greenhouse operation to be constructed.
Okay, I apologize. I keep tripping up on that, but
Okay.
I'll get it straight
What-
soon enough.
And so, yeah, so that's the proposal, that there would be a zoning put into effect that would prohibit a greenhouse from being constructed on agriculturally zoned lands inside a hamlet. The one consideration that we've been asked, that has been raised this evening, that we will look into, is there a smaller scale greenhouse that would almost be like an accessory use to a home? You know, and synonymous with, I mean, some of these you can buy actually at prefab at, you know, various commercial establishments. So we don't want to inadvertently create such a
An
prohibitive.
all or nothing.
It doesn't allow that, but we'll look into that. But yes, it's the proposal is to prohibit those types of major commercial or agricultural type of intensive agricultural uses.
Thanks again.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. If again, any questions, members of council? Yes, Councilor Jobin and Councilor Altenhoff.
Certainly. Thank you, through Mr. Mayor. This evening was to listen to residents' concerns, and yes, they went back on some processes that have already been passed. I can appreciate people's feelings or concerns. I absolutely have received and reviewed everybody's correspondence submitted, not only to this meeting, but previously. Quite certain if I haven't responded to you by email, definitely by phone call. Sometimes I'm bombarded just out in public, grocery store, post office, here and there. And things are always clarified and discussed all the time. If somebody feels better by calling names or making statements of aggression, by all means, that is your right, you do you. But I do take this seriously. I take our community's health and development, friendships, relationships, policy, procedure, legal process is all very important to me. So I do not take the insult of my integrity being questioned. I find that very disturbing. I won't stand for it. This council and administration works hard for our community. You're not going to always like anything. And let me ask you something, to those who spoke up this evening. If a medicinal marijuana facility or greenhouse was going up in my back field, would you be this upset? Ask yourself that. We have an obligation and a responsibility, and I work hard for the community. So I do not take the name calling lightly, and I don't appreciate it. And this will be the last time I hear it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Jobin. Councilor Altenhoff.
Thank you, Worship. And through you too, perhaps Mr. Hillman, I'm looking for, and excuse my desire to really kind of quantify or really get into the details of the term intensive, use. But is there, I just want to make sure that there's, appropriate verbiage put into place here so that we can really quantify what everyone understands, what that measure of intensive is. Is it a size? Is it a production amount? Is it a cost amount? You know, whatever it is. And excuse me, I don't know how to do that, but I certainly think it would be most appropriate for everyone that we, if we could, to perhaps quantify that aspect so that everyone will understand the limits and constraints associated, you know, as we invoke this or look at this amendment further. Thank you.
Certainly, through you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Altonoff. So really, intensive livestock uses are sort of what have always classically been deemed to be an intensive agricultural use. In an intensive livestock operation, there is a definition of what constitutes an intensive livestock operation. It's very much a derivative of rules and regulations from the Ministry of Agriculture and Food that relate to minimum distance separations. So examples of that would be, and there's in the bylaw terminology that relates to the number of animal units you have per acre. Okay, and you have to exceed a certain number. If it's a horse, it's one number. If it's a chicken, it's a different number, right? And it's all centered around the concept of, well, basically, how are you going to manage the byproduct, which is any, you know, for cattle, the manure and so on. So an intensive livestock operation is a very well understood and recognized term, both in the planning world and in the world of agricultural operations. And a good example is across from Councillor Jobin's. Of course, we have there a livestock operation. Now, the way the bylaw is also set up, it establishes what the ratios are for the number of animal units per acre that's allowed. But it also says anything greater than 10 units is deemed to be an intensive livestock operation. So it's a fairly, it casts a net that's fairly broad. And most of those operations have a significant amount of building associated with them. The two others are mushroom operations, which are operations within enclosed buildings, partially, and partially they have a component of it that's typically outside where they're rotating the material that's going into the beds inside the mushroom operation. And again, mushroom operations are characteristically large buildings, and they have significant investments associated with them. And then with greenhouse operations, they are basically anything under glass or plastic and associated uses, whether it be warehousing, shipping, and that sort of thing. So generally, those are the three intensive type of agricultural uses. Other agricultural uses generally have buildings associated with them that would involve either maybe dryers, corn dryers, or they're going to be barns for the incidental equipment storage and so on. So those are very normal agricultural operations that would not be deemed to be intensive. So we actually, when we're listing intensive livestock operation, greenhouse operation, and a mushroom operation, those are identifiable operations that have significant building components and are defined terms. So they're well understood.
Deputy Mayor Bichetti.
Thank you, Your Mayor. Just a couple points then. You know, in terms of consensus-wise, I believe what I'm hearing tonight that the consensus is most of them, the delegations are in support of the housekeeping zoning bylaw amendment. It does keep with the provincial policy, and in terms of moving forward, I think you know what Mr. Hillman has addressed tonight in his report is well received and something that we can take a step and build from there. I know there's still a lot of work. There's some history that was brought up tonight that's not part of the meeting, and you know, just like Councillor Jobin said, you know, it's easy to make statements and attack and say that the town doesn't care. I do care. I'm a former Sangre South councillor. I was there back in the 90s. I do care about that area dearly, as much as Councillor Jobin and as much as the rest of this council that sits here today. So again, we work as a team. We try to work with all the things that come in front of us, but property owners have rights too. And so there is a process. There's a lot of things that come at us that we have to basically find that balance. And tonight, again, moving with this housekeeping amendment is a move in the right direction. I know Mr. Hillman has indicated the next year or so, we're going to get the secondary plan for the old castle there and start up and running. And so there's going to be a lot of opportunities and engagement with the public, which is what we all want. So again, you know, we are here trying to do our best, and I applaud the delegations for bringing forward their input. But again, in terms of, you know, making some remarks off the side like that, again, that's not called for. And I think we need to move forward and work together, looking at the future of this municipality. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Any further questions or comments to Mr. Hillman on seeing none, then Councilor Dowie?
Well, thank you, Worship. What I hope is a very brief question for Mr. Hillman. Given the what we heard tonight about the need, an expressed need for a bit more flexibility in that greenhouse definition, is that something that we will be looking at to verify, you know, what the best definition is for our circumstances?
Yeah, that's exactly what the Councilor Altenoff had brought to the table. And so the quick and dirty answer on that one is absolutely.
Mr. Mayor, if I could, just briefly, to Councillor Dowie, thank you through you, Mr. Mayor. And I think I may have indicated earlier, it may not have come across clearly, that there are a couple of things that were raised by Ms. Robson that we'll take a look at. One is, you know, that the definition doesn't inadvertently cover off the type of agricultural production that has actually plastic placed on the ground that is used quite commonly. And the second is that we look at a definition and a regulation that allows some degree of flexibility that seems to be desirable and is deemed acceptable. So we'll look into that and bring back some options for council to consider as part of the amendment.
All right, and then nothing further than communications. We've got 13 pieces of communications from various residents across the community. And could I have a motion to receive those? Councilor Tonio and Councilor Houston, all in favor? Opposed, if any, that's carried. Again, I remind those that have made submissions, please, if you can email or even mail drop to the clerk's office under the attention of Ms. Moy, our clerk, that would be certainly appreciated. And on the report, the Planning and Building Services 2020-24 housekeeping amendment to limit permitted use on agricultural zone lands in the hamlet development designation be received. Councilor Dowie, Deputy Mayor Bichetti, all in favor? Opposed, if any, that's carried. And if there's nothing further at this stage, I'd like to say thank you to all who participated and members of council. As you know, we have a full meeting at 7 o'clock this evening. We'll, for those who are on the line as well, certainly will be notified when Mr. Hillman in the planning department will bring back the final report for certainly adoption. So, Mr. Hagerman, you'll certainly be notified, and I see you're still on, and Ms. Robson and Ms. Rao, all of them as well. So with that, members of council, adjournment is in order. Councillor Altenoff and Councillor Tonio, all in favor? Opposed, if any, that is carried. Thank you very much for your attendance, and then we'll certainly wait for the report to come back from administration dealing with the requests that have been brought forward tonight. So I bid you good evening.